How do you find these characters, and what leads you to a situation where you feel there's a film to be made from their lives?
I mean, I find them generally through word of mouth. It's quite simple, really. I ask around, and the more I've made films about people who live in the wilderness, more people kind of come to me and say, "Oh, you should meet this guy. He makes weird inventions in the middle of a forest. You're going to love him." But Jake was the first, really. So that was through my friend Paul, who I'd gone looking for. I specifically wanted to find somebody in the wilderness to make a film about, because I'd been reading lots of Knut Hamsun, and particularly this book called Pan. So I went to Norway to try and find a hermit in Norway, and I didn't find one. I was there for a month or something. Just, asking around. I didn't really have any leads. It was completely like
it's difficult with
stupid
though, isn't it?
trip. But so I came back home like empty-handed, and Paul told me about Jake in Scotland. This was in 2005. So I went to visit Jake, and he was very welcoming, and I made a short film about him called This Is My Land. And he liked it, which is good. So that started a relationship with him, but then I went off and started making other films about other people who, partly it was the time thing which was appealing to me. So that was the kind of catalyst for a lot of the films, was the fact that these people had decided to live kind of at a more self-regulated relationship to time, rather than being kind of, time being enforced upon them by all these other forces that you have living in a kind of urban environment. So I made a whole series of films, but when I finally got the opportunity to make a longer film, thanks to Film London, I started thinking about making a film about another person who I didn't know, but in the back of my head I kept thinking I really want to go back to Jake, because he's really important to me. He's a really special person, because he was like the beginning of this sort of particular sort of inquiry that I went down. And I felt like there was still a lot more to do in that space. The first film was very fragmentary and it's short, and I felt like I wanted to like draw out. I really wanted this film to like draw out the time, and play around with like long takes and things like that. So I asked Jake if he was into it, and he immediately said yes, that he would love to do it, and that he was actually really happy about the possibility of being a star, which is it does seem unlike him when you see him in the film, but in reality he's very sort of gregarious, friendly, noisy kind of person, and clearly is very comfortable with his image. He's very. I think he's a brilliant performer.
What's really striking, comparing the two films, of course, is this degree to which you've entered a kind of fictional kind of collaboration with Jake in the feature. Clearly now there's a sense of a dialogue of shared intent before even starting the making of the film. Could you just sort of tease out a little bit how that worked in terms of developing narratives and scenarios around this particular film?
Yeah. I think, it changed throughout the process of making it. At the beginning, I talked about bringing in some of the other characters who visit him, because he does have visitors, friends and strangers come and stay there. But it was pretty early on that I decided that I wanted to concentrate just on him and try and make a film of just one person. It seemed like a good sort of challenge. And I would, so the first, as is the way with a lot of the films I made, I try and make more than one trip. So this film was 5 trips altogether. Each trip, you know, lasts 1 to 3 weeks of living there, and so the first trip is really just like I do a bit of filming, but it's more just like getting back into the vibe and the rhythm of the place and thinking about what the film might be. And then, so when I went home and developed the first bits of material, I started thinking about sort of the kind of scenes that I wanted and some sort of key sort of set pieces, I guess. And, you know, very simple. I mean, there's no script. It's really just like I write lists. You know, there's it was like waking up, coffee, you know, toilet, shower. You know, often just single words, or you know, clearing out the caravan. You know, it's the simplest script you can imagine. And then I discuss these things with Jake, and he rarely refuses to do anything. And our discussions are usually based around practicalities rather than getting deep into the meaning of things, which he's not really so interested in talking about. He's like, yeah, we can do it this way, and so it's kind of pragmatic.
But that chimes in, doesn't it, very well with your own approach, which I think you've spoken extremely eloquently elsewhere about the idea that you're a materialist, not an idealist. You don't deal in metaphor. You film actually existing reality, which on one level is free of meaning at the point of filming, and then in the assembly, the kind of collage of editing, meanings come which remain almost exclusively within the film themselves. That's the point of almost the filmmaking, isn't it, that you make another reality. So in a sense, there was presumably a very clear meeting of minds, although you were the maker and he was the subject on one level. It must have, as you suggested, been a very productive encounter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably also why I chose him above making a feature film about anyone else, because I knew that we already had this connection. He understood, he'd seen a lot of my films, he understood where I was coming from, so it felt more like a collaboration, you know, something that, it wasn't just me going in there, and neither was I just going in there and filming him in an observational kind of way, nor was I just going in there and demanding that he does things in a kind of megalomaniacal kind of director way. It was a kind of, you know, it did feel like a meeting of minds, and, you know, I always make sure that he was comfortable with the things that we were doing. I mean, the lake was touch and go. He was a bit nervous about going out on the raft. You know, for obvious reasons. It was freezing cold, and he could have sunk. And
fair enough. All good reasons, you know. What leads the edit? How do you lead in the editing?
I mean, that kind of is the most difficult question to answer, because it's really hard to like define it. To like, there's no formula. I'm not working to, you know, something that I'm really clear about, and maybe that's partly how it works. But you know, it's sort of months of fiddling around and moving things around and putting sounds on images and seeing if they change the dynamic. And I don't know. Yeah, it is like waiting for something to declare itself, waiting for like eureka moments that then kind of inform like a whole sequence. Or it's really tricky to like to explain, you know, how it's done, other than loads of cups of tea and insane amounts of procrastination.
You also mentioned it's much easier in lots of ways to work with longer sequences in black and white than it is with colour. Colour editing is much harder.
Yeah, I do find colour harder. It's more. I mean, well, because you've got this sort of homogeneity with black and white, and especially with somewhere like you know, Jake's place, which is you know, there's really so much action, and you know, one of the reasons why I need to direct him is because he's really hard to pin down. He will start a job and then move to another one and then move to another one, you know, because he needs a spanner for this job, and then he goes off to find the spanner and then just gets sidetracked into another one. So, you know, there's this, you know, there's that a kind of element of needing control, but also like there's a lot of discontinuity in the filming, and it's also done over the course of a year and big gaps. So black and white is one way of kind of bringing all that stuff together. It's quite useful, but it's not entirely like practical choice. It's also there's other reasons why I like black and white.
How do you think of yourself within this larger structure now, given that you are working within a medium and often with characters and locations that themselves are equally threatened by lots of other forces, larger forces? How do you think of your own body of work and your own making at this time in the medium?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I have to consider all the time, and I think as time goes on, I mean, I'm not kind of so into this idea of like, the death of things. People were proclaiming the death of film and everything. Well, actually, there's still quite a lot of different ways of going about it. But I don't know. In a way, it does make me feel more strongly about continuing using film, because I really dislike the idea of. It's not that I'm against digital. Some of my best friends make digital films, but the thing is, I don't like the idea of being forced into something. I like the idea of choice. I can never understand why one has to like negate the other. It's just you use certain mediums because they suit certain themes in your work, and film has always worked for me. So I can't really understand why it's it's purely about money and business, which is what's sickening about it. It's, the idea of big business forcing artists to work in a certain way does make you kind of want to be a bit reactionary in a good way.